community is, if we're honest, is a buzzword. I mean, it's a word that's gotten popular maybe in the last 5 to 10 years. And in some way, when we use the word community, maybe it brings thoughts of, you know, that mid-90s show called Friends. But when we begin to do the work of community, when we become intentional about creating a common or shared life, we will inevitably collide with its difficulties. A lot of us have romanticism around the idea of community, but community practiced has a lot of speed bumps, has a lot of roadblocks. We are so soaked in individualism that oftentimes we're not even aware of how grating community can become. You know, in our Western mindset, we are fierce individualists. We talked about this in the last video. Really, the bottom line for my identity is my ability to succeed and make a name for myself in the West. But in the first century world, they were first collectivists. Their identity was attached to a larger community. They found part of their stillness, part of their security in what they were attached to. Here we find our security in our ability to pick ourselves up, you know, on our own, or to be have fierce determination and pursue our own agendas. But in the first century world, that is not how identity was formed, and specifically in the early church. Community practically grates against us. It grates against our care for our own needs first. It grates against our desire to make our own decisions on our own time. It grates against our own need for personal space on my terms. It grates against all these natural thrusts of our culture. It's a bit intoxicating, if you're honest, to move at your pace when you want to. It's a bit intoxicating, if you're honest, to choose what you want to choose when you want to choose it. It's a bit intoxicating to live life for yourself first, and then if there's anything left over, maybe it's for somebody else. This is one of the reasons that I am minorly, maybe more than that, obsessed with the Lord of the Rings. I love that series of movies because when you look at the typical hero movie, it's about that one heroine who, against all odds, by him or herself, is able to succeed and at the end wins the day. But in the Lord of the Rings, the hero is the Fellowship of the Ring. It's not one person, it's a community of rejects and ragamuffins and warriors and non-warriors who together bond and collaborate and mutually own a mission. And it is their community together that moves them forward. So really, when you look at the end of the movie, the heroine is the Fellowship. It's not an isolated individual. That's hard for us to think in terms of the collective. But kingdom community, which is supposed to be a slice, a foretaste of the future kingdom that's supposed to take hold on this world, is to be seen in the here and now. And it's going to have some serious collision with our practical life. I like to draw this chart real quick for you. When it comes to the way that we're wired and the way that we interact with people, oftentimes we're kind of ignorant to some social dynamics, but I want to draw this circle for you. And we're going to call these the dynamics of connectedness. And I'll let you spell the rest. But the dynamics of connectedness are happening all the time. We're just not always aware of them. But in the dynamics of connectedness, we have public space, we have social space, we have personal space, and then we have intimate space. Community is formed in this little quadrant here. In intimacy, it's impossible to have intimacy when a group is larger than 3 people. In social science, they have observed that when the group gets larger than that, it's hard for people to genuinely be intimate because they can only make eye contact with so many people. The moment you get outside of 3 people, you start moving into the territory of personal and social space. Public space is a reality around past 40, sometimes 50. It's a rough marker. But in public space, you can participate in a group without being responsible for your presence. So you can be there and not be responsible for interacting. You can just observe and take in, but you don't have to be responsible for interaction. Community is this center space between 3, 4, and 40. I mean, it seems like a large chunk. But here is where the early church formed these oikoses. You might call them households, where people could be known, but also shared a social life. It says they ate and drank together all the time in Acts 2. And this is where the social life was formed. Often we're a little ignorant to these dynamics and we think that we can have intimacy with people, with 10 people in a room. Or we think that we're having community because we're in a crowd. But really, this center space is a place that we have to become intentional about creating. For when it comes to the life of a community, this center space of social and personal space has 2 habits that cultivate it, that create it. The first one is, I'm going to write this on the board for you, and I will write it over here, is availability. I can't spell that well, so I'll let you spell the rest. Availability. Availability is intentionally making your life available to other people. That might sound simplistic or elementary, but availability is me purposing, my wife and I purposing, to have shared meals with other people in our community. Not haphazardly, not once a month, but it becomes a regular routine of dining. We call it divine hospitality. Somehow God is present in that meal. But we do this on a regular basis, and it starts to cultivate and create an availability to one another. I think this is a lost practice when it comes to being a follower of Jesus. We think that availability is just going to be created because we come and worship together. But availability is intentionally overlapping our lives. I'm going to ask you at the end of the video to brainstorm some ways for you to become more available to one another. And you'll find how the moment you dream up or think of a new way to be available, it's going to collide with individualism. The second practice is vulnerability. Vulnerability. This first one is intentional to begin to overlap our lives together. This second one is intentional to begin to present ourselves as we are. There's some questions that are always a part of our existence. And in vulnerability, those questions are, what am I afraid of? What am I insecure about? Or what am I angry about? Those 3 questions, when talked about on a regular basis in community, in cluster, in oikos, in household, begin to draw us out of being inauthentic, protected, posing, and pull us incrementally into a space of being vulnerable, of being who we are in front of other people without fear of rejection. Those 3 questions, what am I afraid of? What am I insecure about? And what am I angry about? Are questions that poke at our present life. At this very moment, I have some things that I'm insecure about. I have some things that I'm a bit afraid about. I have some things that I'm slightly angry about. And it's easy for me to hold those to myself, even when I'm in a group. But these two rhythms cultivate and garden this soil so that we begin to get dirt underneath our fingertips, under our nails, when it comes to community. Community is the face of missionality. We think that we can do mission detached from a way of life, that it can become an event, or it can become an activity, or it can become a project, or a program, or a plan. But missionality flows out of a way of life. Now, community is not an airtight space. It was never intended in the early church to be an airtight space where it becomes exclusive and protected and isolated from other people. That our availability and vulnerability is something that we seal off. Actually, community is supposed to create an open space for sojourners, for God seekers, for the disgruntled, for the bitter, for the frightened, to begin to see the body of God available and vulnerable. These become winsome, become attractive. No longer do we have to put our stock in a winsome preacher or an attractive building. The body of God becomes attractive because it incarnates. It takes on flesh and bone and skin. But it doesn't happen haphazardly. We have to work towards community. That might seem like a no-brainer. But I see community like stoking a fire. You put logs in the fire and you continue to work it so that you receive warmth from it. The moment you sit back and say, put enough logs in the fire, I'm done, is the moment that the fire begins to go in the opposite direction. It begins to go out. If we want to receive warmth from that fire, we have to continue to work it and get up sometimes from our seat and lift a log. And this is what community is like. It's a fire that rages, that we receive warmth from, that we receive comfort from, that we receive light from, but it doesn't maintain itself. It doesn't maintain itself. But primarily understood, community creates, as we close, it creates this centripetal force. I don't even know how to spell that. Centripetal force. And that's a fancy word for saying that as we model this way of life, this holy mess of a life, working to orient around each other, it has a natural pull for those who are around it, who are observing it, who overlap with it, who taste it, who come in contact with it, who are invited into it. It pulls them slowly to the center, not to a place of just belonging, but to a place of wanting to worship this King that we worship.